being that I don't have many sources, I'm going to have to go with the basic story of the gospel. You have a man named Jesus who comes in a time where there's great tension in Israel between the Romans and the Jewish people. They're under great persecution, and the expectation of a Messiah, a Redeemer, to come to Israel and to overthrow Rome was ripe. And Jesus comes at this time, and he's a great teacher, and he manages to attract a crowd of followers, Jewish followers, and he claims about himself and gets others to follow him that he was in fact the Messiah. He was going to be the one to redeem the Jewish people. Now if we pause for a moment and we think about this claim to be the Messiah, there's nothing un-Jewish about it. If someone today were to come along and claim to be the Messiah, well, what would be a healthy response? We wouldn't say, well, you heretic, get out of Judaism. We'd say, that's wonderful. We're looking forward to everything that you're going to do. This is not something negative, this is something positive. This is somebody who's claiming that he's going to bring about all the promises that God made to Israel, bringing them back into the land, restoring peace to the world, bringing a knowledge of God to the ends of the world where everybody, the entire humanity, will come together and worship the God of Israel. That's amazing. That's wonderful. And so if I would have been living 2,000 years ago and Jesus came to me and claimed to be the Messiah, I would say, welcome. So nice to see you. I'm looking forward. So it's nothing un-Jewish. So what happens is he continues his life. He's going from place to place preaching, and there's miracles that are recorded in the Gospels. Actually, we're told that he becomes very popular. Many people come because they hear about the healings, etc. And this goes on. He becomes more popular and more famous to the point where at times he had to actually sneak away because of people who are coming. You know, the thousands of people who seem to be coming to hear from him and to be healed by him. But then we come to a major challenge. What happens is that Jesus is arrested by the high priest and by the soldiers. He's taken away, and he is crucified by Pontius Pilate. Now, this is something that the entire Jewish people were not expecting. No one was expecting a Messiah to come and to be crucified like a common thief. They were expecting somebody to come triumphantly, to come and to be victorious and to bring about an unbelievable revolution and victory for the Jewish people. What ultimately happens is that Jesus is crucified, and if we look in Matthew to the last words on the lips of Jesus, Jesus cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Now, I'm going to speculate for a moment and try and interpret those words in the way I understand them. Jesus really hoped to be the Messiah. He really hoped that it was going to happen in his lifetime. He was going to bring about this change which he had preached. If you look through the Gospels, what was his message to the world during his lifetime? Repent, because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. In Hebrew terminology, do teshuvah, because Mashiach is coming. That's very Jewish. And he had really hoped and believed that that was actually going to happen. When he gets to the cross and he's finally crucified, what was he hoping for? So if you look through the Bible, you'll find different stories where, against all odds, God performed a miracle and the Jewish people were victorious. So perhaps what Jesus was hoping for is some similar miracle, that despite all odds, God would perform a miracle and he would ultimately be victorious. When he's on the cross, he realizes that this isn't happening. And he asks God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? I tried so hard to bring the Mashiach. I tried so hard to bring change to the Jewish people, and yet I see that my efforts have not brought the result that I was looking for. Now, what happens to the followers of Jesus? So the first thing that happens to them is they're thrown into confusion. They're thrown into confusion. They're not sure what they're supposed to do, because this is not what they had been expecting. So, for example, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, you have Peter, who hails Jesus as the Messiah when Jesus says, "Who do you say I am?" So he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." He had recognized that Jesus was the Messiah. And then right after that, in the same chapter, Jesus tells them, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be killed." And Peter says, Heaven forbid, far be that from you. This should never happen to you. In other words, they had no expectation of a dying Messiah. What happens after his death is, there's a little bit of a confusion. However, the devotion was so deep, the devotion was so great, that they were not ready to give up this belief in Jesus coming to redeem the world. So, let's pause for a moment and think about what they then assumed. They assumed that, yes, Jesus was not victorious at his death. However, he will return. He will return, and he will return soon. He will return very soon, and then he will be victorious over the whole world. Now, have we violated anything in Judaism? So some people will say, of course. In Judaism, there's no such thing as a Messiah coming from the dead. So I'll tell you that that's not necessarily the case. We know, based on the book of Daniel and other places, that there's a concept of the resurrection of the dead. There is the resurrection of the dead. So you have, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. There's going to be a resurrection. And the Bible isn't very clear or specific about how this will play out. In other words, at which point in the Messianic era will the resurrection take place? So is it possible to say that somebody will be resurrected and then bring the Messiah? So normative Judaism would say, we were never expecting that, but they cannot rule out the possibility that perhaps, we have to be big enough to say that perhaps this could happen. Perhaps there could be a resurrection and the Messiah will come from the dead and bring about the change in the world. Possible. Now, the Gospels have Jesus predicting his imminent return. In other words, the belief of the apostles was that this is going to happen right now. This is not something that's going to happen in the lifetimes of our great-grandchildren. They were expecting it right there and then. So in Matthew chapter 16, verse 28, you have Jesus saying, I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And Matthew chapter 24, verse 34, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass until all these things have happened. In Matthew 24, Jesus is talking about signs of the end, signs that are going to happen before the end comes. He says these things are going to happen while you guys are still alive. So this expectation is really there. And at the moment, nothing from Judaism has yet been violated.